The meeting has now started.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Dear Minister Prentis, Executive Director, members of the ICO, coffee stakeholders and coffee lovers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I hope everyone's had their coffee this morning and I'm delighted to welcome everyone here today. It is a great honour for me as Chairman of the International Coffee Council during the year 2020-2021 to welcome you to today's event, The Value of Coffee, and to be your facilitator. Today, we will be welcoming the United Kingdom as an official member of the International Coffee Organization, as well as launching the much anticipated Coffee Development Report 2020, entitled The Value of Coffee, Sustainability, Inclusiveness, and Resilience of the Coffee Global Value Chain. Coffee is the most popular drink worldwide, with around 2 billion cups consumed every day, but it is also responsible for the livelihood of millions of people around the world. As the only intergovernmental organisation on coffee, the ICO is a unique forum for countries that import coffee like the UK and countries that primarily export coffee such as Brazil, Vietnam or Uganda. The ICO enables stakeholders, governments, industry, academia, NGOs and consumers, as well as development partners. Over 50 years ago today, it was recognised that there was need for such a unique forum as the ICO to exist, bringing together producing and consuming countries made up of, but also working for, the global coffee community. The ICO must be a forum for discussions, for new ideas and for mobilising resources. Today, the organisation is more necessary than ever, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic adding dramatic challenges to an already difficult situation for millions of farmers and their families who were already struggling with low coffee prices and extreme price volatility. In this respect, the Coffee Development Report, which will be presented later, offers a detailed overview of the current situation in the coffee sector and explores possible avenues of reflection for the future. As Chair of the International Coffee Council, I am dedicated to support and work with all the ICO members to building a sustainable and equitable coffee sector for all. During today's event, we will be celebrating our newest member, the United Kingdom, who is the 49th member of the ICO. The United Kingdom has completed the process of accession to the ICO and became an independent member from the 1st of January 2021. ICO members currently account for 97% of world coffee production and exports and over 2/3 of coffee imports. Today, the event will be divided into two parts. Next slide there, please. One focusing on our newest member, the United Kingdom, and part two focusing on the key findings of the ICO flagship report, Coffee Development Report 2020. We have an esteemed list of speakers who we shall hear from today, including the Honourable Victoria Prentis, MP and Parliamentary Under-Secretary for State for Farming, Fisheries and Food, followed by Jose Sete, the Executive Director of the ICO, and Paul Rourke, the Executive Director of the British Coffee Association. The highlights of the Coffee Development Report 2020 will be provided by Gerardo Patticcioni, Head of Operation at the ICO, with commentary from Christoph Sanger, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and former ICO Senior Economist Rocco Machiavello, London School of Economics and Political Science, Aoife Hanley, the Kiel Institute for World Economy, and Sebastian Lech, German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. In regard to the practicalities now, so the next slide, please. In regards to how the audience can ask a question, please note that the audience is on mute, except for the moderator and the speakers. This is to reduce noise interruptions during the meeting. If you would like to ask a question, please click on participants and press the raise hand function. Then we will unmute your microphone. When asking a question, the audience can share their camera if they wish, or if you prefer, you can send written questions to the organizer in the Zoom chat. Also, just for your awareness, the webinar is being recorded by the ICO. Next slide, please. So, first of all, I'd like to quickly run through today's agenda for the webinar. In part one, we'll have a statement by Victoria Prentis, Under-Secretary for State at the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, followed by a statement by Jose Sete, the Executive Director of the ICO, a statement by Paul Rourke, Executive Director of the British Coffee Association, and then there'll be some time for questions by the press. In part two, then, we'll have an introduction to the Coffee Development Report by Jose Sete, followed by a presentation on the main findings of the report by Gerardo Pataccioni. Then there'll be a panel discussion and questions and answers with the audience. And I'll finish up then with some closing remarks on the discussions as they were today. So firstly, now let me welcome Minister Victoria Prentis, who will say some words on behalf of the United Kingdom. I'll pass it over to you, Minister.
Thank you very much, John. And I'm really pleased today that the UK will be officially joining the ICO as an individual importing member. We will be able to continue to work with you all and to champion together the global coffee sector. We really welcome the ICO's efforts to work closely with many national and regional coffee organisations and to respond to real challenges such as the current green coffee price crisis and, of course, the pandemic, which we're all facing. It's been a very challenging year, personally for all of us, and indeed for the businesses that many of your members are trying to run. I hope in particular that Jose is feeling much better, and I think it's amazing that he's here with us all for at least part of the session today. In coffee terms, the pandemic has led to both supply and demand shocks. It's caused difficulties at every stage of the process with the availability of labour to bring in the harvest, with global logistics and shipping, and of course in enormous volatility and changes to consumer behaviour across the world. This is clearly a good time to work together. The ICO facilitates the relationship between the private sector and other international and national organisations through your consultative board. In the UK, we are in the midst of the pandemic, but we are feeling some shoots of hope in the form of vaccinations. We've just heard that my old dad, who's 79, will be vaccinated next week, and many families across the UK are feeling a sense of relief as older relatives start to go up the queue towards vaccination. So we are very much looking forward to a time when we can welcome your members back to London. We hope that there is a route out of the pandemic for us all that won't be too far away. As you know, we don't grow coffee in the UK. It certainly rains, but we don't have the other climatic conditions necessary. But we do, as you know, import £827 million a year's worth of coffee into our nation. We're clear that this trade shouldn't come at the expense of the environment, and I know that many of your members work hard to make sure that the expansion to the global coffee trade is sustainable. In my department, we work closely with the British Coffee Association, and I know that Paul will tell you shortly more about UK coffee. I have a personal interest. JDE, Jacobs Douwe Egberts, is in my constituency, and I enjoy a good relationship with them and much of their coffee on a daily basis. You have a great lineup now to discuss the coffee development report. I'm sorry I won't be with you for the whole session, but I am really looking forward to working closely with the ICO in the coming years.
Thank you, Minister. Thanks for those kind words, and ICO will look forward to working very closely with the UK moving forward. So moving on then, I pass over the floor to our Executive Director, Jose Sete, please.
Thank you, John. Honourable Victoria Prentis, Under-Secretary of State at the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Mr. John Maldoni, Chair of the International Coffee Council for Coffee Year 2020/21. Ambassador Ivan Romero Martinez, Vice Chair of the International Coffee Council. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, afternoon, and evening. Thank you for joining us on this very important day. When I sat down to write these words of introduction, I found myself struggling with the right words to greet the accession of the United Kingdom to the International Coffee Organization. The words welcome or even welcome back just didn't seem right. After all, the United Kingdom is a founding member of the ICO, having originally joined on April 25th, 1963, and has been with us throughout the 57 intervening years, even if it was formally represented by the European Union since 2011. So the UK is already fully involved in our work. A good demonstration of the close ties that bind the UK and the ICO is the very location of our organization. The ICO has been headquartered in London since April 1st, 1965, only a few years after it came into existence. The reasons why the ICO originally chose London, such as central location and abundant transportation connections, continue to be valid and are much appreciated by our members. We are grateful to the government of the UK for providing all the conditions to conduct the work of the ICO under the headquarters agreement, which defines the status, privileges, and immunities of the organization, and which has been maintained with the host government since 1969. Another significant demonstration of our close ties has been the speed with which the government of the UK deposited its instrument of accession to the ICO on 31st December of last year, at the earliest moment possible. I believe that the speed of the accession also reflects that the UK believes in the unique role of the ICO in bringing together governments of coffee producing and consuming countries to find solutions to the daunting challenges we face, always acting in conjunction with the private sector. Above all, we must find ways in which the millions of small-scale producers who produce a large share of the world's coffee can benefit more from the wealth that flows into the sector. Speaking of the private sector, the engine that drives the coffee sector, the links between coffee and the United Kingdom have deep historical roots that stretch back for centuries. Some of you may be surprised to know that Lloyd's of London, the gigantic insurance and reinsurance market, was founded by Edward Lloyd in his coffee house on Tower Street in 1686. Although the UK is traditionally thought of as a tea-drinking nation, coffee is becoming increasingly popular. Since the 1990s, we have witnessed a boom in coffee consumption of all kinds, from easily prepared instant coffee to single origin brews served in sophisticated coffee shops. Especially interesting is the growth in out-of-home consumption. In fact, the UK has more than 25,000 coffee shops and is the biggest branded coffee shop market in Europe. This diversity makes for a very distinctive and interesting market that all those involved with coffee must monitor closely. In many ways, to look at the British market is to take a peek into the future of coffee consumption all over the world. For these reasons, I am very happy that we are joined today by Paul Rook, the Executive Director of the British Coffee Association, with which the ICO has close ties. Coming back to my original dilemma about the best words to convey what we feel on this occasion. Perhaps the most suitable expression is to follow the example of the British by concealing our inner pleasure and simply saying, keep calm and carry on. We will keep calm and we will carry on, but we will feel all the better with the UK on board the ship of the ICO in these challenging times. Finally, since among the key functions of the ICO are to provide data and analysis of the coffee sector, to enhance market transparency, share best practices, and offer policy and strategic options, we are honored to celebrate UK membership in the ICO with the launch of our flagship report, the Coffee Development Report 2020 on the value of coffee. This document provides new insights on the evolution of the coffee global value chain and how to make it sustainable, inclusive, and resilient, with a focus on the millions of coffee growers around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose. And again, good to see you back in the seat here. You have a very wide insight to the coffee sector and the entire value chain. So moving on then, I'd like to call on Paul Rourke, the Executive Director of the British Coffee Association, to share with us his private sector views on the importance of the UK joining the ICO and their expectations. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Minister, Executive Director, ICO colleagues and members, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And I'll start by echoing the comments of both the Minister and the Chairman. Jose, very good to see you with us.
Qua. Facciamo un bel giro.
It is indeed an honour for the British Coffee Association to be able to join you for this very important event today, tempered only by the fact that we must do so virtually. And I would like to begin by saying that as a coffee family, we recognise the impact that COVID is having on that family, most notably in many coffee producing countries. And our thoughts are with those who have experienced or are continuing to experience the devastation this virus has brought. So we must extend our thanks to all the producers who have continued to operate, to produce and to export through this most difficult of times. I think, as has been touched on already, coffee is an integral part of UK life. And whilst we've not been able to enjoy it in all its forms over the past months, it's clear that the public do retain their love of coffee in all its forms. Now, market analysis undertaken by BCA prior to the pandemic, so 12 months ago, showed that the UK consumes around 37 billion cups of coffee a year, which equates to slightly more than 100 million a day and is an increase on our sort of previous estimate of 95 million. So coffee is an 11 billion pounds turnover business and employs over 150,000 people, from trade, and roasting, all the way through to retail. So coffee does indeed matter to the UK, and coffee has a long backstory, and Jose has already referred to that. As he mentioned, the London's history as a coffee trading centre, and indeed coffee houses have been established in the capital since the 17th century. So as BCA, and again, as has already been touched on, we do very much welcome the importance which the Minister and her colleagues have attached to so swiftly indicating the UK's intention to take up its ICO membership and to be able to join you all today. Now, I came into the world of coffee and to BCA in March last year, but I do have nearly 30 years of experience of working with colleagues and indeed friends within DEFRA. And I know the regard in which those same people are held in approaching, dealing with and providing solutions to problems and challenges. And for that reason, I can see every opportunity for the UK's accession to ICO to be extremely beneficial for ICO and indeed for BCA and its membership. Now, as we know, coffee is a global product and it's a global crop produced in a range of different countries, but very often produced at a small scale, often on family farms where alternative crop choices can be limited. As a result, coffee is a very important part of the lives and income generation for those producers. So it's perhaps no surprise that there is an ongoing focus on how to rebalance financial equity along the supply chain. And the chairman has touched on that in his opening remarks. So this has been, is, and will continue to be an important part of the role which ICO delivers. And obviously we will shortly hear more at the launch of what I believe is a very comprehensive coffee development report. And what I know which will be very closely studied within DEFRA and indeed within BCA. If I might take the opportunity to make one observation, as I sort of indicated, a relative newcomer, I think there is still more that we can all do in looking beyond our own sector and perhaps engaging even more with those in other commodities to understand some of the common problems that we have and indeed the different ways in which solutions may be approached and found. And in some ways, I do believe that the work of the ICO Public-Private Task Force offers an essential platform to do just that. Now, whilst other crops may not see the sheer number of producers, and whilst other sectors may have larger average farm sizes, I think the challenges are indeed similar. And I'm a firm believer in borrowing from others if it delivers the solution that we need. Now, only a few days ago, in fact, a week ago, BCA ran a webinar looking at how we mobilize science for the long-term future of coffee. And our speaker started by posing a question. When you look at the terrific response that we've seen from scientists to the development of vaccines for COVID in such a short time period, what lessons can we all learn in terms of harnessing a similar level of scientific focus to address the challenges that we face as a coffee sector? Because I believe if we look to the next 15 to 20 years, there are indeed some fundamental questions which science will need to help deliver answers for. Who will be producing coffee? Where will they be producing it? What quantity will they be producing? And what will the quality and the variety of coffee be that is being produced? So whether it's climate change, pest and disease presence, pest and disease resistance, availability of plant protection and plant nutrition options, or soil protection, science will be at the heart of the answers that we need. So we can choose to see that future through the prism of a pessimist, but I personally would much prefer to view it from the side of the optimist and suggest that by working together as business, as national and international organisations and bodies, and as national governments representing both producers and consumers, we can deliver a vibrant, a sustainable and an enjoyable future for coffee. So as the UK embarks on its new future with the ICO, can I offer not only the best wishes from the BCA for that future, but also a willingness to assist both bodies in making that future a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Very insightful, and it is very useful to be an optimist rather than a pessimist when we look at all the challenges that are out there. And I think there will always be a way out when you look at science and are able to engage that in that co-creation manner across all stakeholders that they all benefit equally. Thanks, Paul. So now we're at the end of the first part. So we have a couple of minutes for the media to address questions to the speakers. So again, just to remind you, please introduce yourself, make a short question indicating who you're addressing and where you're from yourself. Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions from the media? Maybe while we wait, if there's any questions from the media, maybe some ICO members would like to ask a question or two. I believe the vice chair of the ICO would like to contribute something. is the ambassador of Honduras there, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Executive Director. Thank you, Minister, Mr. Rook, Mr. Haley. As ICO Vice President elected at the proposal of the coffee exporting country, I want to join in the joys and having the United Kingdom with us again. It's very important for us, and I am sure that your presence will be a great benefit to the organization, and especially to our producer who aspire to a fair price and a world justice and social distribution. Lady Minister, welcome to the International Coffee Organization. Feel at home. We are your friends. We want to work in together. And also, like Honduras ambassador here in United Kingdom, I salute everybody, especially you, Madam Minister. I salute in behalf of the Honduran country, who are now the fish exporting country in the world, the first in Latin America and the first in Central America. It will be a pleasure to work together. Don't hesitate to share anything with us. We are your friend, and welcome again. Thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, I don't think we have any questions from media present.
We have a question from Reuters.
Okay. Do you want is there someone present, or is something put in on the chat arena?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
Hi.
perfect.
Hi, it's May here from Reuters. I've just got a question for Jose Sete. I was wondering if you could, Mr. Sete, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how Central American coffee farmers are managing to withstand the impact of the hurricanes and COVID. What are they doing to survive? Because I'm hearing reports that some of them are abandoning their farms this year. The growing numbers are abandoning their farms this year and abandoning their farms, heading to the US border or to the cities, or moving into alternative crops, or a variety of things. Just wondering if you could speak a bit about what's going on there in light of COVID and the hurricanes and the low prices.
Yes, thank you. I would be cautious about drawing any conclusions at this early stage. The hurricanes were only passed through the region 2 months ago, and it is a bit premature to draw any definitive conclusions. We follow closely the press reports, reports from the trade, reports from our members, and from what I can tell anyway, is that the damage in terms of volume is considered to be relatively small. But, and this is a big but, because the region is a major supplier of high quality coffee, quality may have been affected. And the prices for coffee in the region, the differentials with respect to the New York futures exchange have been consistently high since the hurricanes. With regard to exports, we have many reports of damage to infrastructure, which has causes delays in exports. Now, there is a lag in the reporting of exports. The latest numbers we have are from November, and at that time, for the two first months of the 2020/21 coffee year, we had seen a fall of about 5% in shipments from the region, and the exports from Honduras, which were particularly badly affected, had dropped 48%. But it's that was right after the hurricanes, so it's hard to know if this will keep up, or as the infrastructure is repaired, then we will see an improvement in the flow of coffee to the ports. Now, as ICO, we launched an appeal for all the industry to help the farmers that have been worst affected. We have, as a result of the appeal, received many reports from the private sector of various initiatives that are being implemented. So I hope that this provides some kind of alleviation to the situation. That is where we stand, but we just heard from the ambassador of Honduras and vice chair of the International Coffee Council for this coffee year, Ambassador Ivan Homero Martinez. Honduras was the country that was most affected by this climatic phenomenon. So I'd like to know if he can add some words, some details to my overview. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Executive Director. Well, you explained very clear in general what is the situation in Central America. We don't have already updated right information about the damage. But first of all, I want to say I'm sorry for the loss of life, especially. Central America was affected from Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Belize, Costa Rica, Mexico, El Salvador. But especially Honduras and Nicaragua, we suffer a lot of damage, especially infrastructure. About 60% of the bridges and the roads was destroyed. And the collection of coffee was very difficult that time. And for this reason, we are not available to export all coffee. And the COVID pandemic and the two hurricanes make great damage to the economy of this country. For this reason, we was talking with the ICO in order to make appeal to the specialist coffee buyer in order to help our countries. But we are back, and the last news we have, we are recovering. All the Central America try to working again, and the road for government already has been in some area reconstruct, and we are already ready for make again the coffee from Central America one of the best coffee in the world. Thank you.
I believe we have a question also from Nicaragua to contribute. If not, I believe we have a question from Flavia Gorone for Paul O'Rourke. Flavia, do you want to put your question in? Flavia, are you able to switch on your microphone?
Yes, I think so. Do you hear me? Good morning. Good morning. So my question is talking about use of pesticides during, the coffee production. Do you think the ICO will have a part of managing even the use of this product, considering the UK is not anymore part of Europe, and in Europe we have the EFSA just to look after this aspect? And do you really think that the price will change of coffee itself? I don't know if my question is clear or not.
Could you just repeat the first part of the question, please, Flavia?
Talking about use of pesticides, okay, and the control of them, talking about the limit, everything, just the managing, the general managing. Do you think the ICO will have a part of the managing of this very important part of the business, considering that when obviously the UK was part of the Europe, in Europe we had the EFSA was, let's say, managing even these aspects, talking about analysis, limits, and so on. Do you really think that the ICO will be able to manage even these aspects? And talking a bit about price rise, do you really think that this will change even the price of coffee itself?
Okay, thank you. In terms of the issue of pesticides, and particularly the question of residues and residue limits, I think certainly in the short term, I wouldn't expect to see significant sort of changes in terms of where the UK is versus the sort of the European Union. We have carried over a very the same sort of structure, and I think we will sort of continue with that. But I do think, and certainly my experience over the last few months has shown that the issue of residues is one that is becoming much more important as far as coffee is concerned. And it's not an issue that perhaps coffee has seen so clearly in the past as some other crops, but that is sort of changing. What I would like to see, I think, and I do believe that the UK will want to take a proactive role, is looking at bodies such as Codex Alimentarius, where I know there is quite a lot of discussion about the position of MRLs and the basis on which residue limits are set. So I think that is an organisation where, certainly from a BCA point of view, we're keen to play a role, and I suspect that the UK government will also be looking to sort of Codex. So, but that's a much longer term sort of position, which I think is looking at the basis on which residues are established. And I think that's perhaps the way in which it will go. I think ICO has a role in sort of, looking at that, perhaps maybe supporting it, but I don't necessarily think it would be ICO that would be the lead body. In terms of the pricing, it's very difficult to say. I think, the challenge is for all farmers, irrespective of the crop they're growing, but, I think with farming, the only certainty is change, and that's a comment that, we often sort of hear. But I think the changes are perhaps more significant and more numerous as we go forward. And as as a global community, we're keen to look at alternative ways of protecting crops rather than necessarily just using pesticides. I think widening the package of tools that we have. But we also have the wider issues about climate change and coffee's ability to withstand that. I think all of those will cause us to look at how do we value not only coffee, but also other commodities. But also, I think, how do we ensure that our consumers, our final consumers, understand some of these challenges and understand the part that they also will be paying, and maybe what proportion of the price in the future is actually focused on delivering some of these changes, which will be ultimately beneficial. Comes back to the point, you know, in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, we need to understand who is producing the coffee and where are they producing it. And it may well be that it's not in all the same places that it is today, but hopefully it will be. But we need to arm producers with much more information to help them deal with these challenges and maybe move to solutions that are not just chemical based, but are a mixture of pesticides and cultural controls. And I think, you know, we are seeing an awful lot of that, and we have bodies around the world that are doing that already. And it's how we can focus that and how we can harness it and how we can extend it to producers who maybe are not seeing that information and that help at the moment.
Right. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks very much, Paul. I think clearly a role for science again.
Yes, I am the
Perfect. I believe we have a speaker, Sarah.
President. Yeah. I couldn't intervene before because I couldn't unmute myself, so until now. So I am the ambassador of Nicaragua. I want to, on my capacity also of representative to ICO, I want to welcome United Kingdom as a new member and look forward for all their views to come, particularly in this in the new task force that we have developed, the ICO and the members have developed. I think there is a lot of your participation will be important to strengthen the work of those task force. In regarding to the coffee production in Central America, affected by, of course, it was affected by the Hurricane Eta and Iota particularly was in the moment where the starting of the picking of the crops. But we, as a Central America, work together. And with the Central American Bank, we have developed a facility that to recover for a green and sustainable recovery post hurricanes. And also we have reached out the international community to support in the case also ICO has called for that to support the farmers. In the case of Nicaragua, our production is affected, but not as bad as we thought, because the way the hurricane came to Nicaragua was mainly the Atlantic, which is not particularly coffee producing areas. It was the north of the country, you know, like the border with Honduras by Rio Coco that was very bad affected. But particularly it was the crops that came down, you know, because of too much rain, the humidity. But the farmers are resilient. It's incredible. You know, 3 days after I sent a photo to Jose and Gerardo and Wolfgang, showing how the farmers, although were clearing themselves the path to so they can bring the coffee down, and you know they use mules, they use horses, so our coffee farmers are resilient, and I think it has to be recognized by the international community, coffee community, to support them more. And from the government part, we have already, in the case of Nicaragua, we have already advanced in clearing the path, the road, the rural roads and the main roads, the bridges. Most of the bridges have been already habilitated, so there is no limitations in the bringing the coffee for export. So, but still, it will probably be a little bit less production that we thought, that was expected before the ETA and IOTA. But that doesn't, in our case, the farmers are sticking to the production of coffee. Some have included cocoa, for example, as a alternative also. So they have two crops, cocoa and coffee. And the question about, I want to mention also about the question about pesticides. There is a very good movement, a strong movement that have started in Nicaragua related to agroecology, the use of agroecology for the production of all crops, but particularly with coffee. Farmers are tending due precisely to the cost of those of pesticides and the effects that could be to their health. They are discovering and investing more in learning how to develop agroecology in their farms. The use of all the agroecology activities that. So welcome again to United Kingdom, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for those words. I believe we have another question from Sarah Baker, I think, from Australia. So we'll give her the floor. And again, I think we're running short on time at this point. So if you could keep the question short and response short too, please. Sarah.
Of course. This is Sarah from Global Coffee Report. Lovely to see everyone, and congratulations to the UK on joining the ICO. What a fantastic achievement. May I just ask Mr. Sete, what significant changes do you expect to see as a result of the UK's independence, both positive and negative for the industry? And what key projects or initiatives are you most excited to tackle together?
Thank you, Sarah. And before I reply, let me thank you personally for the partnership that we have developed in recent years. As I said in my initial statement, I think the UK was already fully integrated into the work of the ICO, even though maybe at a second-hand level, let's say, but already fully integrated. And we will, as I said, we will keep calm and carry on. Of course, the contributions of the UK, both the public and private sector, are much appreciated. The UK is kind of a unique coffee market in the world. It's very different from most other markets in developed economies. So I think that will bring us a fresh viewpoint to the work of the organization. But overall, I think it's much more a question of integration and building on what already exists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose. I don't think we have any further questions from the media at this point. So maybe with that, I will thank the speakers. Thank you to Minister Prentis for words on joining, to Paul O'Rourke and to Jose Sete for their contributions at this point in time. And again, to everyone that contributed to the discussion and the Vice Chair as well. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to part 2. Jose is going to again fill us in on this year's coffee development report and why it's important for members and all stakeholders in the value chain. I think that this report and the deep analysis that it provides to the coffee sector illustrates how the ICO as an intergovernmental agency is an indispensable actor in elaborating the future of this particular commodity. So with that, I'll invite Gerardo, Head of Operations of the ICO, to provide a quick overview of the highlights of the 2020 report. And then Gerardo will follow through and facilitate a panel of experts that have contributed to the report in terms of questions and answers. Gerardo, the floor is yours.
So I believe that we will ask the executive director to give us the setting the scene and bringing us into the coffee development report before I go to some of more technicalities about the report itself. And we start the panel.
Okay, apologies for that mix-up. Jose.
Thank you, John. You're doing a great job. I'm back. I'd like to start by welcoming our panelists today. I hope I get this right. I fear not. Efi Hanley of the Kiel Institute of Global Economy, Rocco Machiavello of the London School of Economics, my dear ex-colleague and friend Christoph Zenger, former senior economist at the ICO and now at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and my also colleague Rebecca Pandolf, head of the ICO statistics section, all of whom made important contributions to the 2020 edition of the Coffee Development Report. A warm welcome to all the participants in today's event, ICO members and coffee friends. Just to put this publication in context, this is the second edition of the Coffee Development Report, which was intended to bring together all the work, our analytical work, under a single focus. And the first one, the 2019 edition, was on the analysis of the economic sustainability of the world coffee sector. And this one focuses on the value of coffee, from bean to cup, from farmer to consumer, from agricultural production to disposal. It reflects the structural changes in international trade and the rise of GVCs, the global coffee, the global value chains, while maintaining the emphasis on the economic sustainability of the coffee sector. With this report, we want to contribute to help understanding the dynamics and governance of the entire coffee global value chain and its evolution over the years, and to provide new quantitative analyses of this chain, capitalizing on 30 years of detailed ICO data, scientific case studies, and also issues that are part of the wider debate on development. Let me also stress that we have all been profoundly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and I can speak from personal experience. We face a dramatic global crisis with extreme consequences from a health, social, and emotional perspective. Sadly, the pandemic is also having a major impact on poverty and food security, especially in rural areas and among the most vulnerable and low-income parts of the world population, including coffee-producing communities. The coffee sector has been hit hard by the coronavirus, and its future, resilience, and adaptation to changes are threatened. This is an unprecedented situation as both supply and demand have been affected. Additionally, many jobs across the coffee value chain have recently been lost, including seasonal picking jobs and especially those in the retail sector, which are often held by young people. This is extending the crisis to those with low income and who are most vulnerable. The cumulative effects of the coffee price crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic present a major hazard for millions of coffee farmers who are already struggling to cover their operating costs, let alone provide for their families. In addition, the scarcity of resources generates a significant reduction of investment in farm operations, as well as in the adaptation to climate change, thereby jeopardizing the sustainability of the coffee supply. This report builds on the ICO's prompt assessment of the impact of the pandemic on the coffee sector and identification of options and partners to address the contingent problems and facilitate a prompt recovery for all coffee stakeholders, especially farmers and their families. We have also incorporated some initial reflections on the fragility and resilience of the coffee value chain to the pandemic, as well as to climate emergencies and weather shocks, political instability, and plant pests and disease. This is the first report to present evidence on the coffee global value chain based on sound empirical analysis, thereby generating insights and recommendations. Within the global value chain framework, the report, for the first time, moves beyond the traditional dichotomy of exporting, producing, importing, consuming countries to more accurately reflect the complex reality of international trade in coffee and coffee products. Additionally, special attention is dedicated to how global coffee value chains contribute to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Our report presents the evolution, drivers, and impact of the coffee global value chain and the resulting policy options to enable coffee producers to earn a prosperous income while ensuring social and environmental sustainability. It also clearly identifies the need for collective effort required from governments, industry, financial institutions, and development partners, as well as consumers, for a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient value chains. Let me take a sip of my coffee first. Yes, better now. A smart mix of market-driven initiatives and regulatory options, constructive dialogue, and joint action between public and private sector stakeholders, along with accurate and timely information to facilitate cooperation, are necessary to maximize the economic benefits of the coffee value chain while ensuring social and environmental sustainability. As this report shows clearly, even more strongly than before, I am convinced that the ICO, in fulfilling its mandate, plays a key role in providing rigorous and independent data and analysis to policymakers, industry, and all coffee stakeholders, including consumers. Let me conclude by extending my personal compliments to the entire ICO team, with a special recognition of the head of operations, Gerardo Pataconi, who was the leader of this effort. as well as our international experts and external contributors who accepted the challenge of initiating and blazing a new trail for the organization by producing, in spite of the pandemic, this timely report that should inspire all parties interested in promoting the sustainable and just development of the coffee sector as a whole and prosperity for all. I'd like to conclude by excusing myself from further participation in the event. As I mentioned earlier, I have not been spared by the pandemic. In fact, I fought 15 rounds with it and almost came out on the losing side. I left hospital just over a week ago, and my full recovery will require some time still. I have a session of physiotherapy coming up in a few minutes, so must leave you now in the capable hands of Gerardo Pataconi. Thank you. Over to you, Gerardo.
Thank you very much, Jose. And just before we go into the details, just let me say that we see that coffee helps also against COVID. And the fact that after a week of hospital intensive care, you're drinking coffee, you're with us. I mean, that is a good sign for everybody. Drinking coffee help also to fight COVID. And you know, we all wish you very fast recovery, but you're still working already too much. I think you should take it a little bit easier, but thank you so much, and all the best. If John allow me, we move to the panel itself. Would that be okay? Before I start, I see here the speakers that were introduced by Jose, and just let me say that many others have contributed to the report. Normally you do this at the end, but I want to say that, well, who's not there is Chancellor Harsland, who was the economist at the ICO that contributed together with Carmen Steinmetz. The whole team, because, you know, Professor Arlie, she was together with Dennis Gorlick, Van Hint Liu, Finn O. Samrao, from the Kiel Institute of World Economy, Manuel Hernandez from IFPRI, the International Food Policy Research Institute, Christopher Alliot, the Le Basique, Professor Dordi from Bocconi University, Daniele Giovannucci from the COSA, and Frank Arkwich from UNIDO that contributed to the report. You know, also the UNIDO team, Denis Sadieu, the chief economist, Nikita Sadieu, the statistician. Special thanks to Lina Gashumba, that has been, you know, the ICO Secretary Communication Officer, that work on the report together with Mirella Glass, and the team, Andy Ricci and the great team at Blackwood Creative. And a special appreciation goes to the Hungarian artist Petra Zentai, that's been the creator and inspiring artwork for the front and the cover of the report. And so maybe all of you, if you're there, you can, you know, you can wave and show your face. So how do we want to highlight what is in the report? Let me just go through a very short presentation before we go to the detail of the let's see, matters of point. Yes, should be this one. About the report. Now, let me go to very quickly summary. You believe you have a chance to, and you had the link to get the report, to read it, to go through it. The report is also available on a hard copy, but that of course will have a cost, but otherwise for free you can download it. Now, what is the report today? Well, first of all, as we say, you know, is talking about the value of coffee. What is the actual value of coffee? Now, we have seen that, and this was mentioned already by our executive director, then, you know, we want to look at the structural changes in international trade and the rise of global value chain. We want to look into the focus on trade, but also we still pay attention to the economic viability, especially for coffee farmers. I was done in the coffee development report last year. Of course, we look into always the how to reach this sustainability. This is, and then at the outset, we have to thank a special contribution by the Ministry of Economic Development in Germany, by BMZ, through the GIZ, and their support through the Kiel Institute for World Economy. Then, of course, there were, I say, all the other contribution I mentioned before. I mean, this is a teamwork and has been complex, do it everything online, but I think we managed well. What are the other issues about the report? Well, as I say, we wanted to use and extend the global value chain analysis to the coffee sector specifically. And this is, really one of the first studies that comprehensive look into that. The coffee global value chain based on sound empirical analysis. We will see, we hear from IFE the detail of that. Of course, there is a different way, not look to the coffee sector in this way. As Jose mentioned, the difference is not just exporting or importing by producing and consuming, but it's really in the whole context of the global value chain. What we pay special attention is private sector driven programs, because there's been a lot of field experience on that. We want to share that and analyze and share the best practices. We want to look into the link and global value chain contribution to meeting the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, we had the question about resilience and to global value chain, the coffee value chain, to different stresses like the pandemic. And in fact, the report, while we were preparing, we started looking to the COVID-19 pandemic impact based on 3 major studies that we produced during the year. The overview, the report is divided in 3 parts with a number of sections. First of all is the overview of the entire report with the key findings. This is a condensed part of the report, and this will be also translated into French, Spanish, and Portuguese. They are the ICO official languages. Part 2 is, in the first session, we'll see the race of coffee global value chain, the evolution and all drivers of participation. Section B, look at resilience. Section C on the economic and social environmental impacts of the coffee GVC in producing countries, and D about policy implication and recommendations. Finally, part 3, and we had this compared to last year edition, the full coffee market overview for the coffee year 2019 and 20, who's been a very special year. I will not go into the detail because that's what is the panelists that contributed to that. They will bring all the details. And of course, really, you should go through the beautiful report. Well, just the evolution has been significant. Maybe I can just mark here that the change and the way the system has changed dramatically in the last 30 years. 30 years has been a revolution for the coffee sector, where even more than 4 times of the growing demand and the value of export has increased. You can see that in the report, and also the difference between the type of coffee. We know that roasted coffee in the different forms compared to soluble and green, they perform differently in terms of volume, but also in terms of unit values. The detail again and the report, and you see that these differences are important to understand and also guide strategic decisions by our members and also by industry. Key points here that maybe I'd like to highlight. You will see that the GVC associated with decommodification is always a difficult word of coffee by value addition through increased product quality, integrating and better relation between farmers and trade and roasters. Processing, of course, is also a key point because that enable opportunities, and the relation and the governance has changed quite dramatically. These come clearly from the analysis. The opportunity exactly for upgrading, and we look at the different way that the coffee producer can upgrade, and finally, how this re-export and the trade flow have changed in the years. That is the basis of the analysis, that to understand how the whole global value chain has evolved in the last 30 years. But this is not just a mere analysis, because that gives indication what to do next. Section A, so look at the drivers. What are the key factors that determine the participation in the coffee global value chain? But then we have the panelists to give us that in further detail, in addition to the report. The section then on resilience, then again has been added while we were developing the report, looking at the fragility of global value chains and the vulnerability to shocks. Was interested in discussing with other international organizations, with the World Bank, how the fragility of the global value chain needed to be looked at it, and the governance and the impact. But also we want to see about other stressors, other factors, and also the report look specifically at the climate shocks. This is again in addition to what was produced in the last year coffee development report. What we'll see also in the detail during the panel, what are the relational aspects, the relation between the parties that are part of the coffee global value chain, and specifically we looked at these buyer-driven programs, and then we'll have also Rocco to discuss about that. Finally, section E is on the state of the coffee market report, and the Rebecca from our chief of the statistical section will give us the detail, and also with some regional highlights. And then finally, we will see what are the policy recommendations that we draw out of the analysis. What are the strategy to expand trade and facilitate participation in the global value chain by removing tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade, facilitation of trade, building infrastructure, and increasing the value addition. And then, but of course, there also we looked at possible negative impact of being part of a global value chain, or the development of the global value chain. And this is, of course, is related to a lot of very important pre-competitive industry initiatives, responsible business practices, but as well as integrated government policy regulations. So this is the report. Today's would be a very good panel, but we will continue like last year with some specific webinars, and possibly in the last part of the year through physical meetings. I thank you so much, and I will go back to the panel now. I'm lucky one because I have a fantastic group of people that contributed to the report. The report is successful, and I think it's very comprehensive because of their participation. We're starting with Christophe. As Christophe was a former serial economist leading all this work. Now he moved to another very important position, but I have, starting with one question, Christophe, what inspired the Coffee Development Report in this year? And what is the link with the World Development Report by the World Bank? I mean, how and why we looked at the coffee sector? Can you give us that quickly, an overview, so people and participants understand why we produced this? You have the floor.
Thank you, Gerardo, and good afternoon from London. It's a pleasure to be here and to see so many familiar faces. Indeed, the Coffee Development Report 2020 kept me busy throughout the last year until my transition to the European Bank, where I now oversee a somewhat larger portfolio of sectors in my new role as Associate Director for Industry, Commerce and Agribusiness. But after 5 years in the world of coffee, of course, I'm still very much attached to the sector, the product, and the people behind it. And so I'm very happy to see that this work that I was involved in throughout the year has been completed. Yesterday, I have received the print copy in my email, and I'm delighted that I can be here today for the launch event. So let me briefly reflect on your question on what's the concept behind the report. So I think what was really important for us from the beginning was to produce an ICO publication that is firmly anchored in the development debate, in the global development debate. So we wanted to make sure that it's not only read in coffee circles, but also creates attention in the international development community to create awareness about the challenges faced by the sector, but also to, very importantly, mobilize some support. Now, the Coffee Development report responds sort of directly to other flagship reports, in particular the seminal World Bank publication, World Development Report on Global Value Chains. And the CDR does that by deepening the analysis in the area of coffee and extending the analysis. Now, I think what's really important is that we look both at producing and non-producing countries together to paint a really complete picture of the global coffee sector. And we applied this GVC concept to the coffee sector, building on a wealth of ICO statistical data. I think that's really important to highlight here. And this asset that exists in the ICO could be leveraged in particular by teaming up with GVC experts at the Kiel Institute, but also at LSE and other organizations. And it's great that this work was facilitated by BMZ through GIZ. The result, in my view, is a quite dense report which contains an analysis on the evolution and, very importantly, on the drivers of GVC participation. And what's really interesting is that we look at both the country level, but also the farm level. And I think the analysis really helps to identify some bright spots here. So we are able to identify factors that enable GVC participation, that enable value addition, and that also enable higher incomes for farmers. And in that sense, the title of the report and the artwork, in my view, also reflects the idea of success stories that exist in the sector that faces many challenges. Now, creating this understanding, where are the bright spots and how can they be replicated in other contexts, in other countries, that is an important first step for change in the sector. And the change will be driven certainly by various actors, including policymakers, through better industrial and trade policies, and Ifi will go into more detail on that. But also through international financial institutions, we will drive the change. And these sustainable sourcing programs of roasters and traders, and that's something that Rocco will touch upon in more detail, they are oftentimes costly and require financial institutions with risk appetite. And so at the EBRD, we finance commodity traders such as Olam and Louis Dreyfus that provide important linkages to farmers, including extension services and pre-harvest finance. The new strategic framework of the bank reaffirms the continued strategic interest in a limited and incremental expansion to sub-Saharan Africa, with new opportunities arising. And I'm certainly glad to bring some coffee background to the table in this new role. But I'm also really interested now, not taking up too much space, to hear from the co-authors on the specific contents of the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christoph, for your contribution. But everybody will get a second question, maybe a third one if we have enough time. And so you have to still, be ready to answer. Now, I have the pleasure to ask Professor Ife Hanley, to represent the whole team of the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. They just carry out this empirical study on the coffee global value chain. And of course, the question is, what about, you have understanding knowledge in general of global value chains, and what is the experience with coffee, and your analysis on the determinants and the drivers of the coffee global value chain. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gerardo. I'm delighted to have been, to represent the Kiel team here, to have been invited to take part in this very exciting and very timely study. And I was impressed by the speakers earlier, by the speakers from Honduras and Nicaragua, but also by Jose Sete, and the sense that one is looking for solutions now. One is looking for what Christoph calls the bright spots. And so that's really what I would like you to take from this, is the bright spots, the possibilities and the success stories, because if there's anything I want you to take from this presentation, it is that it is possible to find solutions. It is possible to see, using also the data, which I'll take you through, where those possibilities arise and where the scope is for implementing these solutions. So what I'd just like to talk to you first of all about is the fact that this is a very novel study, and so thank you for inviting us on board. We didn't realize the data was so rich. So there's 30 years of data which we could analyze and also graft onto other data to throw some light onto these drivers, these cross-country drivers that induce countries to integrate into these global value chains. So what we're looking for is we're looking for possibilities like tariffs, international tariffs, in very concrete terms. Or we're looking at the level of industrializations of these countries. And to what extent does this help or hinder these countries from being able to capture value from the coffee that they're producing? Now, one reason why this is extremely novel, and this has been pointed out before by several of the speakers, is because we're broadening the lens here. We're not just restricting our analysis to countries like Colombia or Honduras or Nicaragua, the coffee producing countries. We're actually looking as well at countries like Switzerland or Germany or the UK, where the coffee is also produced. So this is extremely agnostic, it's extremely broad, and we feel that this is important to broaden the lens, because if we're looking at global value chains, we have to actually start talking about global and not just restricting it to the coffee growing countries. So what we use is we use an empirical framework, and really just to take you through this, we're looking at many predictive tools. When we're trying to predict, we have to look back into the past. So we're looking back into the past using regression techniques, which allow us to look collectively over 30 years of data, over many countries, and to look therefore on aggregate at these patterns, and then see the trajectory in the past and use that to predict the future. Now, there isn't a complete one-to-one mapping, but it gives us a pretty good impression of what the future could be like and what those drivers are. So what the triggers are that allow countries to capture value from Robusta and Arabica production. So what we then do is, I'm very aware the clock is ticking, and our next speaker from London School of Economics will follow me on, so I don't want to take up too much time, but I'd like you to look at a diagram, which I hope you can see on your monitors. I can see it here on my script. And this looks at what we call functional upgrading in producing countries. And the first point that I want to look at is the fact that if we're looking at these drivers, we have to create some what we call proxy variables. These are measures to capture something like, for example, the amount of investment in these countries in roads, in harbors, in ports. Thank you very much, Rina. So let's just start at the top of this slide here, and we look at these investments by countries that are exporting green coffee. So we start with this bunch of variables at the top, which is factor endowments. Now, the first one is capital to GDP. Now, what that is measuring is the extent to which these countries are investing, as I said before, in upgrading their agricultural practices, in ports, in airports, in anything that could be used to get the goods to port and for sale. You can see there's two types of bars. There's a dark bar and there's a green bar, a light lime green bar. The dark bars are the ones that show that these variables help the countries to capture value from the coffee that they produce. So they're you could say it's the these are the helpful or the beneficial variables. The ones that are light green that move to the left, they're the ones that are handicapping the countries, and we'll come to them in turn. So you could see, unsurprisingly, that countries that are able to make the investments in their capital, they're able to capture comparatively more value from the coffee that's produced. So it's very important to be able to have an infrastructure that allows you to get, let's say, Arabica from mountainous regions down to the ports. So we cannot emphasize enough the necessity to have this type of investment. So whether that investment comes from domestic sources or abroad, we don't look into that. We just say that it's important and it should be there because it is a prerequisite for value to be captured. Now, the other thing I would say goes hand in hand with these investments is industrial capacity. Now, what we mean by that is that when I used to think about coffee, I would think of nice ordered rows of coffee plants soaking up the sun. But in fact, there's a lot of mechanization involved. And therefore, there needs to be some industrial capacity before these countries can capture value from the Arabica and Robustas that are produced in the countries. So there's enormous complementarities between an industrial base as well and an agricultural base, as many of you know yourselves. So therefore, we could see that if you have, for example, a very strong and thriving cocoa industry, like let's say in Ghana, and you have the capacity and the machinery to deal with that, there's a very big spin-off from that, because you can leverage value from your industrial base. And there are some success stories that have managed to do that very well. So I had some discussions with Christoph about this, and we'd like to highlight perhaps Vietnam and Ecuador and the Philippines. We can come to them later, for being able to create, let's say, soluble coffees from either cultivated Robustas or from imported. We're not saying, we're agnostic about that. So where the coffee comes from, it can be imported or it can be cultivated in the country itself. But these seem to be doing very well in this sense. But yes, industrial capacity is important. It can be exploited and value can be leveraged from it. The next thing I'd like to point out, and this is something that is very, there's a lot of consensus about this. And if we look at the World Development Report 2020, which was used to inform these drivers, right? This is important, that we didn't get these drivers from nowhere. This actually is informed from the World Development Report. Tariffs are always singled out as being a very important aspect of value creation, because they act as very severe impediments for growers and for producers in many economies, not just, or in any sectors, not just the coffee producing sector. So you can see here that tariffs are an impediment. It's seen as being highly significant. That's why we have little stars here on the tariff rate variable. So yes, tariffs matter a lot. And the good news is they can be changed. So that's why it's good to be mindful of negotiations when they take place and see to what extent they can impact on the industry. The other thing I'd like to point out, and this is something not very obvious, but when we talk about the coffee industry, many of us are dealing with economies that are highly diversified. So to capture the amount of diversity in these economies, we look at the resources or the rents that come from, let's say, extractive industries like crude oil that is extracted, because these industries are often very, very big, and they can serve to make it difficult for coffee growers and producers to employ workers at a competitive price, because if the workers get attracted to these other industries, it's very, very hard to capture much value. So you could find that there are industries cannibalizing each other, and that's what we see in this variable where we look at resources or rents from these extractive industries. And you can see, because the bar is on the left, that indeed they do serve to handicap value that is captured. So one has to be mindful not just of the coffee industry, but what other industries are active in the economy, because these other industries can give or take, and in some cases take quite largely from the aspiration of the coffee industry to capture value. The next thing that is uncontroversial is that the countries must be stable. Now, of course, this is quite intuitive, because without political stability, it's very difficult to form contractual relationships. And this is really what we're thinking about. We're thinking of long-term sustainability. We need to be able to plan into the future. And if there is some danger or hazard, then it's very hard to enforce contracts or to write them in a binding way. So political stability is extremely important. The other thing I'd like to point out here, I'm sorry, I'm skipping around the variables a bit, but I have a kind of taxonomy in my head here, and that is to do with FDI, foreign direct investment. And this is something I know that many of us are highly interested in, because it will be touched on again later, the role of investment by foreign firms in the host economy. Now, it's pretty uncontroversial that FDI, but foreign investment, is good. And we will not dispute that. But so you might ask me, well, why do we see here that it's negative? Well, the reason it's negative, and then maybe Krista would like to add to this, but I think one of the main reasons is something that I've touched on before, and it has to do with the fact that you have many different industries in any one country. And FDI is often attracted into an extractive industry such as petroleum. And therefore, we're not looking at just the coffee industry here. We're looking at all receipts of FDI into the economy. So that's why it can actually mean that the prices are bid up for the actual farms that are producing the coffee. So individual projects are good. But if we look across the whole palette of FDI into the economy, you can see that on aggregate, it's not helping the coffee industry if, for example, there's a lot of investment into another part of the economy. Now, another very interesting variable here, and it's something I'd like to dwell on a little bit, because it picks up on some of the contributions that have been made by other speakers, and that is we look here at the value added, in particular where we have Robusta types dominating, right? So you can see that there's a lot happening here. There's a very high black bar here, where countries are able to capture a lot of value in roasting or in creating soluble coffees and serving local coffee markets. Now, I would love to have even more granular data, even more sort of disaggregated data to actually, how do you say this, unpack this result even more. But this is a very exciting finding. And it's something, again, that I'd like to invite your comments on, because it's something that suggests a lot of possibility in terms of perhaps these localized markets. So this is something the ICO might like to add to, but we find that this is something very positive. So yes, just to conclude, these country level drivers are extremely important. We've been able to look over 30 years of data and pick up these very strong patterns. We would like to be able to, of course, look even deeper on perhaps even the project level. But even without looking more deeply on the project level, we can see these strong and striking patterns. And there are some things that can be done to assist the degree to which coffee producing and exporting countries are able to capture more value from their green coffee exports, and also from their from generating soluble coffees for supplying to local markets. So thank you. I'd like to hand back to Gerardo.
Thank you so much. I think you gave a lot of very interesting points there. in fact, been incorporated into the report. Now, let's move to another part that, again, I mentioned earlier, and that I would like Rocco Machiavello is professor at LSE, is an old friend of the ICO already, because he's been, already participating in a number of our discussions and contributing a lot. And of course, in the report, we have, discussion and intervention, but I think we'd like to focus on one of the parts that he contributed most, and also based on analytical work and field experience, is about the assessment of this involvement of foreign firms in sourcing coffee from in the coffee global value chain, related also when it was mentioned. Can you give us your view and highlights, please? Thank you, Rocco, you have the floor. Welcome.
First of all, thanks, Gerardo. Good afternoon, everyone from London as well. It's a great honor and opportunity to be here. It would have been much nicer, of course, if this could have happened in person, and we would have then been able to meet and develop our relationship. Yeah, so thanks, Gerardo, for the question. We looked at a couple of specific examples, and the reason we wanted to do that is because when we study global value chains, it's very important to also, on top of the broad picture that I've just shared with us, also kind of trying to understand the contractual, the organizational aspects that enable the knowledge transfer that happen through deeper participation in global value chains. And of course, to do that, you require more granular data that we can sort of find in concrete examples. And so I'm going to share a couple of different examples. One is from Rwanda, and one is going to be from Colombia. The example from Rwanda, which is a remarkable success story, a country in which in the last couple of decades, literally hundreds of coffee washing stations have sort of spring up. And this very fast process of growth, of course, has been associated with the improvement in quality and in value addition through the washing. And then, as it often happens in industry that are growing fast, a process of consolidation in this industry has happened, whereby following the very rapid entry, we have seen the emergence of groups, that is of firms that are larger and manage multiple washing stations. And among those groups, some of those groups are foreign owned, okay? So they will be the case of FDI, but specific to the coffee sector. And what we see is that with the diffusion or emergence of the foreign owned groups, particularly of the groups in general, but the foreign groups in particular, is associated with, if you want, an improvement in the management practices, in the quality of management, the professionalizations in the management of the coffee washing station, which then end up benefiting efficiency because you get better capacity utilization, higher volumes. It improves the quality of the product. It typically also improves the relationship between the beneficiaries, the washing stations, and the farmers. And it could also generate, and this is the reason why many countries try to attract FDI in manufacturing, in agribusiness, in other sectors. It could also benefit the country as a whole through additional channels, such as knowledge spillovers, because these employees, domestic Rwandese employees that work in this washing station, they might learn better management practices when they change job, when they start another firm, maybe they enter even a different sector, they retain some of this management. So that's the first instances of a positive upgrading that has happened through the entry and expansion, particularly of a foreign-owned group that we have seen. The second example, so I just gave you an example where the deeper participation happens through ownership. Okay. But that's not necessarily how it needs to happen. It can also happen through deeper, stronger relationship between the foreign, if you like, players and the local players. And here, an example that we studied quite in detail is the case of the Sustainable Quality Program done by one very large foreign buyers in many countries, but we were able to study particularly the case of Colombia through a research collaboration with the Federación Nacional de Cafeteros. So the study was totally independent from the buyer, and we used the data that the Federación kind of collects just to sort of for the purpose of its function. And this is a buyer-driven program whereby the buyer and the exporter, in this case the Federación, sort of collaborate to provide extension services to the farmers, help with replanting, training, and so forth. And we find very positive effect of this program, huge impact on the growth of coffee, on the replanting, on the quality of the plantation, even entry of new coffee farmers in the localities in which the program expanded. But one thing that I want to stress is that thanks to the collaboration with the FNC, we were able to understand the mechanism through which the program was so successful. And I think that as with any human endeavor and enterprise, the success boils down to the effort and passions of the people involved. But more concretely, maybe in this context, one aspect that we want to highlight is the importance of the very strong relationship between the buyer and the exporter, in this case, the FNC. And second, also the fact that the contract, or if you like, the program can be thought through the lens of a vertical restraint. So vertical restraints are contracts where a contract at one point in the chain, in this case between the exporter and the foreign buyers, specify how someone else on the chain, in this case the farmer, ought to be paid. Okay. And I think that this program very successfully pulled off this kind of contractual innovation, if you like. And this gives me a couple of general thoughts. One is that maybe technology is going to enable or facilitate the emergence of this type of contracting schemes elsewhere. And second, also the fact that maybe this type of contracting schemes give us a lens to think about sustainable sourcing a little bit more broadly, maybe an issue that we can touch again on, during the next question. I don't want to take too much time now, but thank you, Gerard.
Thank you, Rocco, again for your important highlights. Let's try to build, the story. In fact, we are highlighting, spotlighting on the report. Just I want to take this opportunity before I go to Sebastian Lesch to have Chansin, who has been not only contributed to the report but also had a similar experience in the field in Uganda. Can you very shortly give us your experience? I mean, how that differ from Rocco or similar? What is your personal feeling about working with coffee farmers in there? You have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Gerardo. First of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you may be. It's my pleasure to be with you here today. So as Gerardo just introduced me, my name is Chansin Arslan. I'm an economist working with the ICO, and I'm one of the proud contributors to the CDR. I conducted my doctoral studies in Uganda, in particular in the Mount Elgon region of Uganda, which is one of the few regions producing high quality Arabica coffee. So I'd like to talk to you about my observations from the field, because I spent about a year in the field. So for one of our projects, we collaborated with the largest exporter in the area. It's a subsidiary of a multinational trader, and the company has a sustainability program and in this particular region, and it aims to sustainably source high quality coffee. And it provides extension services to farmers, input for coffee production, and it also funds community projects such as construction of schools. And I personally visited the primary school that they built. So as we also present in the CDR, these farmers selling their coffee through this buyer-driven programs receive approximately 25% higher prices than those who don't. So overall, farmers earn better revenues, and they might further invest in health or education of their household members with the revenues they receive. And this can be considered a step towards achieving sustainable development goals, which we also discussed in the report. I'm also personally aware of other buy-in programs working with a smaller number of farmers and paying much higher prices. As Professor Machiavello just discussed, these programs are promising for farmer welfare. So, but I'd like to mention, highlight one problem. There is one problem with these buyer programs, and this is that not all farmers have access to these programs, or they are not always eligible for these programs. This basically tells us that these programs are somehow limited in the number of producers that they reach. And there are a couple of reasons for this. Obviously, implementing such programs at a larger scale requires a lot of working capital and capacity for washing stations, certification-related costs, or operational staff. But another pattern that we see is that these buyer-driven programs select into areas that are most suitable for high-quality coffee production. So if, as a farmer, you happen to be located in such an area, you're likely to benefit from these programs. But what about those who happen to be located in less favorable areas? Here, I'd like to draw attention to heterogeneity in farms and thus policies needed. So I'd like to tell you a very quick story about how these differences can actually exacerbate with the climate change. So one day we're in the field and looking for gardens where we can conduct some research experiments. And we're aware of the opportunities that high altitude farmers have. So we're visiting some coffee gardens in lower altitudes to understand their constraints and opportunities better. So what we see is that many coffee gardens are in terrible conditions. Coffee trees are so unhealthy, weak, with very little produce on them, and some of them are badly affected by coffee leaf rust. As we know, the climate change has started to affect many areas, and farmers are facing such difficult times. A number of them already uprooted their coffee trees and they switched to other crops. So sympathizing with them, we hear about a garden that is doing well enough for our experiments, so we head to there. And then what we see, we enter the garden and we see a stunning garden. Like, it has a lot of very healthy trees with a lot of fully ripe coffee cherries on them. And obviously we're curious, like, what's going on here? Like, after seeing all these very unhealthy gardens, like, how can these
what was that?
I'm gonna tell you now. So, like, what's going on here? After asking a couple of questions, it turns out that what's common in this region is the SL14, SL28 Arabica varieties, because these are basically the only varieties accessible by farmers. But the owner of this beautiful farm received some Katimor seedlings from a relative living abroad. And some of you know, Katimor coffee grows quickly, has high yields, and is pest and leaf resistant. So the farmer was clearly enjoying the harvest and not losing any coffee to leaf rust, which is a major problem in the area. So I understand that a certain variety, such as SL14 or 28, is actually has high cup quality and can fetch high prices. But when you think about it, well, if farmers, like, if half of farmers are like losing maybe half of their crop and are not earning a decent income, I think it's clear that this is not really economically sustainable. So the point I'd like to make is that even within a region, there might be differences in terms of climatic and agronomic conditions, and heterogeneity of farms should be taken into account. We should also keep in mind that a given variety, which was suitable for one particular region 30 years ago, might not be as suitable today with the changing climate. So there is need for research into resilient varieties. Just to sum up, in my opinion, research and consequent update in application regulations, along with policies to incentivize the private sector to scale up such supply chain programs, are, I believe, important steps towards the sustainability of coffee farming and coffee supply. And I think this can only be achieved with cooperation between the private and the public sectors. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Chansin is exactly this. We're moving into the policy recommendation. Then we have, of course, the great honor to have Sebastian Lesch with us from the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation, BMZ. He and all the team also have been contributing financially by supporting this, the Coffee Development Report and the task force, together with through the support of GIZ, and we also thank Daniel May and Ulrike and Isma. Sebastian, I think what also we were discussing what is in the report and already introduced partially by Chansin. I mean, Germany is, is playing a key role also in coffee, in general in policy related to sustainable production and sourcing. This is, it's very important. Why what is the government doing from a policy from an importing country, but you supporting the developing country because that's the role as your ministry. So you are in between. What is your experience? How you connect to the coffee and also with the other commodities? Thank you, Sebastian. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Gerardo. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. And to see everybody, albeit virtually. Good to have this discussion. Let me congratulate you on the report. I think this is a job very well done, and no use indeed for me to add to the contents of the report. That's not my role. why does Germany care? Well, Germany is the second largest importer of coffee, and Germany is at the same time the second largest re-exporter of roasted coffee. So obviously we have an interest in the coffee sector, but obviously with that interest comes a special responsibility as well, and that is the role in which I come into this here. We know that the livelihood of millions of smallholder farmers depend on coffee, and we've just heard stories sort of from the fields, from the coffee plantations, so that illustrates that. I think it was good to hear that at this point. If you look at value creation and distribution along the coffee value chain, then you know, of course, this is very unequal, it's very distorted. Only about 10% of the revenues remain in the producing countries at all. And whilst there is a steady growth in coffee demand, which is good, which adds, but that doesn't mean that that will go into these imbalances, that will equal out the imbalances necessarily. So strategies to add value in producer countries by enabling producers, firms moving to higher value activities, increase the added value, the capabilities, benefits from the productions, that is paramount and that is necessary, and undoubtedly an enabling policy environment for that, both in producing and importing countries will be very important. So what do we do politically? What is our stance as the development ministry in Germany? We are looking at a smart mix. Smart mix has really become the key word here for what we're looking at in the global value chains. We are a strong supporter of stricter regulation on the regulatory side. So what we have is we have a national debate on the national level on national due diligence law, following the implementation of voluntary guidelines, a so-called national action plan that in the second stage foresees a national due diligence law. So that is in national discussion right now. And we have the same discussion on the European level that we're contributing to. You might have heard that there is a horizontal approach by DG Just, the Justice Department of the European Union, that is doing an impact assessment right now, and we also have an impact assessment on deforestation freeness by the Environmental Director General of the European Union. So we have those two lines of work that we're supporting, where we are expecting input for regulatory action. We hope that that will create more of a level playing field also for businesses in Europe, and a higher standard in this particular regard. We also have some particular national initiatives. We have, for example, my minister that is a fervent supporter of abolishing the national coffee tax on that coffee that is produced sustainably. I think that is more to be understood as an interesting initiative. It's probably not going to come into life tomorrow or the day after, but this is an interesting sort of thought on how to create an incentive framework. But that part of that smart mix is also to interact with actors along the value chain, which is, of course, where also the International Coffee Organization comes in, and with the producing countries, where there is a regulatory framework, where there is an interaction and a network of institutions. Plus, what we do in and with the producing countries is we have a number of projects going on where we try to put innovation into the value chain and hope that that will increase sustainability and will increase value addition in the partnering countries. There is a Coffee Innovation Fund where we are trying to implement small innovations in a couple of countries. We are supporting the establishment of a sustainable sourcing region in Ethiopia, where we really try to provide deforestation-free products, including coffee, work towards a living income, look at the living income differential, look at the imbalances in the value chain. We're looking at blockchain technology, which is a very helpful tool sort of for the traceability, but also to really look at the imbalances in the value share and to see what part of the value added is done where. And we've been supporting the Global Coffee Platform, which is working with national coffee platforms in Kenya and in Ethiopia, for example, bringing stakeholders together, trying to initiate a dialogue, because as Kamsen said, this can only be done together. There's nothing that you can done only out of a regulatory approach by putting it into law. And this is not something that can be done by the private sector alone. This is something that needs to be done jointly. So our aim is to bring all sides to the table together, put the income of farming households at the center of the discussion. That is something for us as a development ministry that is paramount, obviously. Look that we cover the aspect of deforestation, we cover the effects on climate change that the coffee sector has, because that is paramount for all our futures. See that we have the private sector on board, that we need in the coffee chain, to be very clear on that, but that also needs to assume responsibility, of course, to have that discussion. Have the public-private task force that the ICO is running to have a networking role, bring everybody along the table, and to look at transparency in the value chain, and be sure that we have some more of that. So that, in a nutshell, is the position from which we are looking at the discussion. And once again, congratulations for the report. I think that's a major step forward. A lot of work went into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. And again, be ready for another, bit more provocative question afterwards. But thank you very much for giving this overview and the fact that there is a plan for a regulatory framework to address these issues, not to impose, complicate things, but really to help to solve, to address the real problems. Now, the last part of the report is what has been produced by Rebecca. Rebecca Padolf, she's the chief of the statistic section in the ICO. Of course, she's been, crunching and data and analysis all the year around, but she managed to focus, to contribute, as I say, with a new sessions of Coffee Development Report with the assessment of the highlights of 2019-20. So what are the highlights I can share quickly with us? And of course, I contributed to also shape up the whole report. Rebecca, you have the floor.
Thank you, Gerardo. As he mentioned, this section of the report is focusing specifically on the major events of coffee year 2019-20. And kind of to place in context, there's always a lot of stuff happening in the global coffee sector and within countries. And this is operating within the larger global value chain. So one of the features of the coffee market since 2016 has been sustained low prices for coffee, which has been a lot of the impetus for the task force and the studies that we've been doing. And this has continued on into the most recently completed coffee year 2019-20. Additionally, coffee prices in 2019-20 were more volatile than previous years, with 3 distinct periods of high volatility, according to IFPRI's excessive food price variability early warning system. There's more details in the report itself if you're interested in it. But the most notable period happened right around the time the global pandemic was starting. And at that time, there was a huge influx of stockpiling as people were worried about being able to access goods at the same time that governments were putting social distancing and national lockdowns in place. After this, there was a surge in global demand in 2018-19. However, the global pandemic, the price fluctuations has significantly impacted the coffee demand in 2019-20, which has declined, with loss in out-of-home consumption only partially offset by increased at-home consumption. Looking at monthly net imports as a proxy for consumption, there was a surge in demand during March, April, during that high price volatility and stockpiling period, which then flattened out over the next few months. And then as the ongoing pandemic, the final quarter of the coffee year, you can see a significant decline in the net imports, which confirms that indeed global coffee consumption is down year on year. Unlike demand, however, production was not greatly impacted. This has to do with the fact that the majority of it was already harvested before the start of the pandemic. Instead, we expect to see more of an impact in the current season, 2021, and perhaps more with lower yields and perhaps quality going down, just because labor is used year round, not just for harvesting, but also maintaining coffee plantations. However, a lot of governments worked hard to put in place safety measures and exempting agricultural workers. So that's kept production and supplies up. And then maybe looking at global coffee trade, that was mainly impacted by shipping delays, both due to limited container availability, particularly at the start, and then fewer workers in major ports. However, the smaller overall supply in 2019-20, as well as declining demand, also played a role, so that overall shipments from producing countries fell by about 5% to 127 million bags. For producer countries, their total export earnings in 2019-20 declined as well by 4% to around $18 billion US. However, on a per unit basis, roasted coffee exports saw a significant increase as the average unit value rose 26% to $1.97 per pound. So despite the overall lower sales, there was an increase in demand, which spurred on the increase in unit value for roasted coffee. Like exports from producer countries, exports from major consumer countries such as the EU and US also saw a decline in overall volume and value terms, particularly for roasted and instant coffee. However, the average unit value for roasted coffee exports from non-producers rose by 4% to around $3 per pound, while instant coffee fell 3% to $1.60 per pound. And that's from the non-producing countries. These are just some of the global highlights for the coffee year. There's a lot more detail, particularly if you want to look in different countries. It covers the supply and demand by region and the major countries within the regions, as well as government policies, any new free trade arrangements during that year. And so I recommend that you look at the report itself. Lastly, I would like to thank members and observer countries for providing their statistical reports, particularly during the past year, given the huge demands to provide information. The data that we receive underpins the research for the coffee development report, as well as other studies. Providing data assists not only with research, but market transparency, both of which help participants in the coffee sector to make more informed decisions. The importance of data in today's world, coupled with the difficulty in collecting and maintaining it, also highlights the importance of capacity building for countries, particularly during these unprecedented times when timely information is key. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for this comprehensive, as you say, the detail and the report. Now, the problem is that we have theoretically finished our time, but I would like to check if you have your availability to stay a little bit longer. I have a second round of questions, and I think that they are quite important as well. I can give you a couple of minutes each to answer that question. I will make to very quickly, but then we should give a little space for our audience to put some more specific questions. Would you agree? Can you nod and fine? I think let's move then quickly with Christophe. Christophe, part of the report, but also part of your work is also to look into upgrading. What are the key elements about the different upgrading option and is related to different type of coffee? Can you summarize what is the highlights of the report on that? Because I think it's quite relevant. Thank you.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. Now I'm unmuted. Great. Yes, I think Effie already mentioned a bit the different types of upgrading that we look at. So we look at primarily functional upgrading. So that's the idea of processing coffee from green to for example roasted or soluble coffee. But we also look very much into improving the quality of coffee, and that's applies in particular to Arabica coffee. And I think what's really important is that the drivers behind improving the quality and adding value through the quality route, in particular for Arabica coffee, are these sourcing programs. And I'd like really just to emphasize one point here that was highlighted by Rocco's intervention, showing a bright spot where it works, where we have value addition through higher quality, and this additional value is shared between the multinational and the farmers, and I think that's really important. But as Jansen said, well, not once you are in that program, it's great because you can participate as farmer, but not everybody can participate. So we really need to make sure that we can bring more farmers into these programs. And one factor that is really important here is as finance, equipping the buyers of coffee through a working capital, for example, to enable them to extend these services to farmers, not only buying, but also providing extension, providing pre-harvest finance, and so on and so forth. And that's, I think, where very much also multilateral development banks come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Christoph, and fantastic for your being so concise. Before I'm asking Aife to continue, I'd like to ask everybody to put questions, to raise your hand. You know, you can do this through the Zoom. You have the possibility, you see the little hand there. Raise your hand so we put in a list to make some specific questions. Please start now while we do this 2 minutes quick round of second questions. I'd like to ask what you already mentioned about what role of foreign investment linked to existing industrial capacity and question of tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade. Can you add any element is in the report and the analysis that would contribute to the discussion based on what other speakers have said? Thank you. You have the floor. Please unmute. Oh, still muted. Okay. Seems to be there's a problem with Aife. I'm gonna switch to Rocco first. Rocco, I think also you touch upon, but the question is, what is sustainable sourcing? We were talking about programs support the private sector driving, but what is the core of the discussion about what is responsible sustainable sourcing? In 2 minutes, give us your view.
Thanks, Gerard. 2 minutes for the $1 million question, but I think it's very important, especially after I heard Sebastian and other participants, that we have a framework to conceptualize what we mean by sustainable sourcing, a framework and a common vocabulary. And so since I'm an economist, I'm going to be bold enough to kind of push for one. First, a preliminary definition. I refer to market failures as situations in which prices do not reflect the opportunity cost of resources. I like this definition because it encompasses a variety of things we care about. It encompasses environmental degradation. The price doesn't reflect that. It encompasses social compliance issues. The price might not reflect the long-term implication of child labor. It encompasses market power. It encompasses many other things that we put under the umbrella or the remit of sustainable sourcing. So with that definition of market failure, I think that sustainable sourcing happens when value that is generated in the consuming countries is used to fix or ameliorate market failures in the producing ones. And I think what I like of this definition is that it is very operational. It is operational for the companies that are setting up these programs, because it forces them to ask, what is exactly the market failure, one or more, that you are addressing with your program? And why is it that your program is addressing those market failure? If you're just pumping money in and through subsidies, that's not addressing a market failure. It is also operational because when we think about market failure, normally we think that is the government remit to deal with market failure. And so what this definition implicitly underlines is the critical importance of public-private partnership, of collaboration between the private sector companies that are involved and the government, not just from a regulatory perspective, but really also from a partnership point of view.
I think it's not only as an economist, I think it's very, very clear. And I invite you to share that during the task force meeting where this question also has been raised. And before I go to Aife, sorry, I think you are muted now. But
I'm fine now.
Yes, can I before ask you, can I ask Sebastian to comment on this? Because core of their work is on sustainable and responsible sourcing. How you respond to Rocco's, and what is the consumer at the end of the day? That's what they want.
Thank you. I mean, the consumer, it's not a yes or no question, right? I mean, there always will be a market for coffee that is very cheap, that is at a discount level. If I look at the German market, Germans apparently statistically drink more coffee than water. I can't really believe that's true, but apparently it is. So that is an everyday product that we consume in masses. For others, that's more easy. If we look at the cocoa value chain, chocolate is more of like a luxury product. It's easier to pay a higher price for something. It's not as easy with coffee, but if you look at how the coffee price works in Germany, we have seen over the past years that people are willing to pay more if the product is associated, or at least a part of the market share, let's put it that way, is willing to pay more if the product is associated with something. If that needs to be a certain lifestyle or a certain technology of making that coffee, if that is a certain region the coffee comes from, if that is the fact that it is a family product coming from somewhere, or if that is sustainability overall, be that because there's a certification label on it, be that because it follows a due diligence that is made transparent. I think that that willingness is there, probably not in 100% of the market, but in far more than the 10% of the market that we have right now. So I think, yes, it's worthwhile to work at that. Yes, the demand is there, but no, that's not the only answer to the whole of the question, obviously.
Thank you so much. I think there are a number of questions now. Would you, as you mentioned the 2 points that I asked you before, can we take 2 questions and then I give you the floor? I don't know. We have Flavia and then we have Joseph. There are 2 questions. I don't know you address it too because I can't read them now. But Flavia, you have the floor, and then see if the general question you address to the specific speaker.
Good afternoon. So this is a question to everyone, so all the countries. What about the developing on new experiment low caffeine plantation, for example, decafito? How much it will cost in terms of time and availability in field use usually to grow Arabica and Robusta? And will your country, wherever it is, be able to sustain the cost of this issue? Because for now, obviously, the decaffeination is always based on the Swiss method or based on the chemicals method usually. But obviously, we know that scientists are trying to create low caffeine variety. But your country will be able to sustain a cost of this because now people are asking more for decaf coffee for different reasons. So my question basically is an economical question. So please give me this answer. It's a very generic question, quite complicated.
About interest to investing, and I have Joseph. I take his question and I to see if there are any other one. Please, you have, yes, go ahead.
Oh, hi. I just want to ask the panel about, has the report actually looked into financial inclusion, perhaps through digitalization, in order to respond to the challenge of lack of coffee credit and finance to the poor families, both in the exporting countries?
Well, let's ask Aifede. She was supposed to speak, and also about the investment and technologies. Would you have an answer?
Right. So the question was investment. I said before that. Can you hear me? Yes. You can. Yes. So investment would be something that we would be interested in looking at if we were to be able to use more granular data. So we were able to see investment, which was captured, as I said before, in the variable, which was, I just returned back to my graph here. I had capital to GDP, and you can see that investment is a very main lever of the ability of countries to lock into the value chain. But you talk about credit as of bank credit for poorer families. And the answer is no, we are not able to see whether poorer families who avail of a bank credit would be able to transform that into an ability to capture value. So in that sense, I have to answer truthfully. The big picture says yes, investment is good, it helps, but in terms of on the ground, farmers using credits, we're not able to see that. But one thing I would like to pick up on, and this is something, if I'm allowed to, Gerardo, and I think it's very, very interesting, is the idea of technology and blockchain technologies. And this picks up again on, as well, what was said earlier by another speaker, is picking up experience from other industries. So that's been, Sebastian also mentioned that this was an initiative that's been carried out in Germany. It's very exciting to look at traceability, because really, if we're looking at decommodification of coffee, we also need to improve the credibility of these products. And if blockchain can be used to help traceability, like it is in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and as well in Rwanda, in the rare earth industries, it's a very interesting future avenue for coffee to exploit, because that's something that I think will certainly speak to customers being willing to pay for the product if they can believe it. And that also, just one thing, I don't want to take the floor too long, but there is recent work on how to motivate consumers to purchase certified forest coffee. And there's evidence from a randomized experiment in a laboratory using eye trackers. So there is very recent evidence now just out of the press, that's in Ecological Economics 2018, which is looking to see how can we induce people to pay the extra 5 cents or 10 cents or 15 cents for a particular coffee, because that's really on the demand side where the next, I think, where the next action will be.
Thank you. I don't know if any other panelists, because I think we are already 60 minutes behind our schedule. And I have also a lot of questions with regards to, the difficulty to access market. And then the answer we say, is also to upgrading, the lack of transparency. We have questions about the extra cost, and asymmetries in information. So there are a lot of questions there, and I don't know, because I think we have to close this. And of course, the report, this is the first, and the idea is to have a series of deeper discussions on a number of issues, looking about how to attract investment for specific varieties, research. I think we open up a large discussions, and I think that's the intention of the ICO and the report, and to having all this external contribution is to really enrich that. Now, some of the answers are there, some policy options, but of course we need to be taken by industry and governments. I think that is clear. And at this moment, I would love to give back the floor to the chair of the International Coffee Council, who will build on this, and I give back John the floor to conclude this. Thank you so much. I mean, it's always, I know that it's frustrating for everybody, but it's just an initial step of sharing the document and the report. You have the floor, John, please. Back to you.
Thank you, Gerardo. What a fascinating discussion that we've had here this afternoon. I think we could have went on all day in terms of trying to scope out and tease out all the issues that are within the global value chain of coffee. But again, as Gerardo pointed out, there's some of these issues maybe we need to take on into some more specific discussion on individual elements to help drive, I suppose, the broader development agenda in terms of meeting sustainability goals right across the globe, and how coffee farmers and the coffee supply chain can contribute to that. I suppose maybe I'll keep it brief in terms of where we are at this point, given that we're running over time. So first of all, I suppose the most important thing here today maybe is, again, on the UK session, to welcome the UK into the ICO. We're a small family, but again, they're very welcome to contribute within it. They have been as part of Europe. So again, it's good to see them take up the mantle so quickly to rejoin the ICO. In terms of the coffee development report, again, a sincere thank you to the entire ICO team and the external contributors for what you've done and what is a fantastic report. It really illustrates the depth of, I suppose, knowledge that's there across the coffee sector, the long timeline of data that's there as well to help inform decisions in terms of what is becoming more complex in terms of supply shocks, demand shocks that are there right on it, and how do we look forward in terms of what will the coffee sector look like in 2050, and how can we inform those important discussions to ensure that everyone benefits, and in particular that we can put farmers at the centre of that to try and ensure that we lift coffee farmers and producers out of poverty and ensure that they're able to meet all their needs. I suppose the other one that I was picking up right throughout the discussion too was the importance of science and how science can inform the development of that agenda, and to ensure that farmers are involved in that dialogue with science, but equally so that consumers are involved with dialogue and science, that they're well informed in terms of what those decisions are, because there's an awful lot of trade-offs that are involved in how you look at different policy outcomes and how you ensure collaboration right across that coffee value chain, that everyone benefits in terms of a way forward. So with that, maybe I'll close this session and again, look forward to taking up the discussion with the ICO itself, with its members, and also for anyone else that wants to contribute into the ICO with thoughts or ideas in terms of where we are with these important discussion items. Okay, so I hope everyone has time for a cup of coffee for lunch. And with that, we'll leave him. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you.